Let's talk about sex, drugs, and rock and roll.
In that order? Sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and what they mean to me. Well, rock and roll, as you know, is a primal juggernaut of chaos and ecstasy all in one. Mm-hmm. That's what I think of when I think of rock and roll.
Do you need to have, when it comes to rock and roll, why do you have to have those elements of the drugs and the sex with it? Or do you need to have
I think
those?
it's kind of like peanut butter and chocolate. That's a magic combination. I mean, when you have all those things together, it's just kind of like that's the perfect equation. Sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Because rock and roll in itself, like I said, it's already a primal thing that happens. Now, depending on what rock and roll does to you, it's something that you start at a young age and you're attracted to it in some form. Now, as you become more and more into it, and this could be like anything, comic books, video games, anything, you become more obsessed with it. Now, some people, they start collecting records. Some folks, they start becoming addicted to going to live rock and roll shows. Or you become a musician. You become in love with the idea of making those sounds that you fall in love with. This is, like I said, it's this primal thing. When I started listening to rock and roll as a young kid, the thrill of it was actually pretending I was singing those songs.
Well, let's talk about the idea of a rock star.
Right.
And, you talk about, we always talk about things of like why is rock and roll dead? Like, what happened? Why don't people give a shit about music like they used to? And I honestly think we're here in Seattle, so let's take it right to the grunge scene when those grunge bands came out. And I remember the big deal about those grunge bands was like you had these dudes, they're wearing like flannel shirts, they're wearing like ripped up shorts and Doc Martens, and they literally looked like people that you'd see at the mall, but they didn't look like rock stars, which how they wore in the 80s, where I'm thinking like Diamond David Lee Roth with the big hair and the spandex.
Well, I think that was rock stardom. I always think it's an attitude.
Yeah.
And in the 80s, being a rock star was that flamboyant hair out to here, leather, chains, just that sexual prowess. I think...
Yeah, well, there was a definite...
After 10 years of that, it burns out. Naturally, it burns out.
Yep.
And then there's this new version of it. And the thing about Seattle, I don't think they were trying to be rock stars.
No, I don't think they were at all. And they were literally wearing...
I thought they were... that whole idea was ridiculous.
They were literally wearing what they were wearing.
They were wearing what they were
wearing. But then that became the new look.
Mm-hmm.
But even going back to like say David Bowie or Queen or Led Zeppelin, Kiss, all the big bands, there's the idea of like the rock star.
Yeah.
And with that, like you when you're a kid, you're like going before the internet, you're kind of going off.
They're larger than life.
They're larger than life, and you don't really know much about them, but what you do know about them is like, hey, those guys are partying and getting laid.
The thing about rock and roll is rock stars is, especially at a young, impressionable age, and this can last from the time it started for me when I was 7,
Yeah.
I sat in front of MTV and just watched those videos, and those visuals of those people on stage became something I was obsessed with. It was more important than anything else going on in the world. Most kids were out riding their bikes. I was listening to Shout at the Devil as an 8-year-old over and over again, pretending I was on stage playing that. Not really having a full idea of what they were singing about, but that energy, that primal energy.
That look, I mean, like what you said.
And the look, it just...
As soon as you said Motley Crue, the first thing that comes to my mind is how they look in the video for Looks to Kill.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
That's not going on at school in the 3rd grade.
Yeah, you're not.
You go to school and you go and you see that and you're like, that's me.
Well, that's what you want to be.
That's what you want to be. But well, that's what rock and roll does. It communicates to you. I mean, I was an outsider at school, so it was like you don't know what you want, but you definitely know what you don't want until you and you go see Motley Crue or Alice Cooper, any of them, Judas Priest, and you're just like, that's me. And then it becomes, like I said earlier, it becomes this obsession.
Yeah.
It becomes this thing where you're like, that it's more important than anything on the planet Earth, and that's what rock stars are.
So when you got into these bands and you're saying like Alice Cooper, Motley Crue, how much of a part of that was you trying to want to emulate them?
100%.
100%.
100%. It wasn't about, oh, that's a catchy tune, and oh, that's really fun when they're singing about Home Sweet Home. No, it was just everything that those videos communicated to me. That's what I wanted my life to be. Some people wanted to play baseball. Some people were riding their bikes. Some people were... I don't know what other kids did. I knew I wanted to learn an instrument. I knew I wanted to be that, dress up, and just be outrageous. That to me was more important than anything on earth.
You got MTV, I think, is...
They scared the shit out of me. That's another thing about rock and roll. It's dangerous. It's not a nice thing. It's a very...
Was it always dangerous?
For the first part of it, it scared me, I remember the backward messaging stuff on...
Oh, God.
That used to scare me.
Oh,
They used to frighten me. I remember when I started going to my first concerts.
Yeah.
The people scared the shit out of me at the concerts. They were all just hideous and outrageous looking. And I was like, I'm surrounded by drug addicts. And it freaked me out. I would always have like butterflies in my stomach before I'm waiting in line, and you're just seeing all these hardcore dudes. I'm at White Zombie, and the Obsessed are playing, and I'm just there in the pit, going, should I fucking be in the pit? I don't know. I don't know if I should be here. I should be sitting in the back. But that's, I think, part of when you take the rock and roll ride, that fear is very important. The women scared the shit out of me. They all looked like they were just going to chew me up and spit me out.
Yeah.
But I also liked it. And that kind of ties into that whole sex thing. The sex thing is like, it's that's what rock and roll is. That's what the word means. That's what that's what it was coined. Rock and roll was a term coined for sex. The old R&B guys.
What I loved about what these old MTV videos, because it could really, like, say if you're a band, it could make your band seem bigger than you actually were.
Oh yeah.
And
isn't that what we all do?
You can create any band can kind of create their own narrative and their own story by those videos.
Right. And
I think a big part of that was the visual aspect of seeing, because before MTV, I mean, you could only hear stuff on the radio unless you actually went to the concerts. Yeah. You didn't. Maybe you saw some pictures and like.
Well, they did have those and I was born in '77.
Yeah.
But I know in the '70s they did have those like variety shows, like the King Biscuit Flower Hour and the Old Gray Whistle Test.
Yeah.
That guy that looked like a freaking
Don Kirshner's. Don Kirshner's was another one.
There were things.
It's funny, but now that you're talking about that, but even in the '70s, let's just say the '70s, what you saw of the band was very, very limited,
right,
and definitely calculated.
And I think that's what makes rock and roll effective. Any band, any music for that, any rock star. There's rock stars in country music, R&B. There's rock stars everywhere. What makes that very effective is the mystique attached to the performer. When you see them and all you have is their songs and the visual, and just that's all you have. You don't know them. When you're in a local scene and everybody knows you and you're up there singing, I think it loses its glitter a little bit.
Oh my God.
Because they know you if you're singing a song, they probably know what you're singing about, or if you're a drug addict,
when it comes to,
but when you don't know the band, you don't know anything about them other than what they look like and what they're singing about, and maybe a couple of things you've read about in articles. I think that makes them more huge.
I agree with you. I agree with you completely, and
they're mysterious. They're mysterious.
So
these days, you can't be mysterious.
So do you think like a perfect example is like Gene Simmons?
Right.
You know, he's the demon, right?
Yeah.
And I remember when that show came out, the Gene Simmons Family Jewels.
Right.
And then now you're seeing him as like a father, like living in his house, and you're just sort of like, this is completely ruining the illusion.
It is. Because
you don't like you when it comes to like your rock and roll heroes, you want them to be larger than life. They don't live where they're on a whole different trajectory.
Right. And he's already like succeeded at the rock and roll dream. So he can go, have a camera crew chase him around his house
but on the flip side,
and it can be amusing.
But you know what's on the flip side though? But I think when Ozzy did the Osbournes, I think it actually worked for him.
Well, it definitely worked for him
because I don't think it worked for
status and
I don't think
celebrity. He became it reinvented his celebrity. I don't know if it was anything that he wanted.
I think for when Gene Simmons did it, I don't think it really helped him.
Well, he was playing off of what Ozzy did.
Osbourne
did that, and it was a success.
But Ozzy went that, and he had the Osbournes, and I think that propelled him even bigger. And now I'm thinking about it. The rules would apply to every rock star, except Ozzy,
right?
Because the more you kind of saw the man behind the curtain, the more you saw the real them, the more it just made him that much more iconic.
Well, what about the Osbournes when you saw that guy, that wasn't an act. Every interview, everything I saw about Ozzy was like, the metal years. That great interview he's doing when he's making breakfast and burning shit and spilling orange juice. But he's still you could tell he's a sweet-natured guy, you know. But he's fucking punch drunk. He's just... And that's what made the Osbournes funny, where you got Gene Simmons, and Gene Simmons is a stone-cold, sober businessman. There's something more amusing about Kiss. You're talking about the demon. He was a kindergarten teacher before he was in Kiss. That, to me, is more like... That's when you go, wow! The demon was a kindergarten teacher? It's when all that little stuff leaks out. It's like it takes away that rock and roll thing. But sometimes I think it makes them more entertaining, depending on what it was. As opposed to them, they were once a rock star, and now they paint houses or something.
Would you say there's any rock stars left now? Like newer bands? Like
I say, rock stars, to me, has always been an attitude. Growing up, it was something that was more visual than anything. But like I said, when you experience rock and roll and what that music does to you, it defines your attitude and what kind of a person you become. And I see rock stars all the time, but they're not necessarily playing music on stage. It's an attitude. Now, as far as that David Bowie rock star, that Marilyn Manson rock star, Alice Cooper, there's people that are still doing it. There's always going to be people playing that music. It's always going to be there. It's going to echo through eternity. But as far as what we consider a rock star, no. You understand? Our brains are wired to what we think is a rock star. And now, even as a sound engineer, I sometimes do a show and you cycle through one band after a band. But once in a while, you'll get a band on stage and you go, those are rock stars. I remember I was doing this festival. This was about 5 years ago. And it was like an indie rock festival. Okay, so you just got run-of-the-mill, flavor of the month, frickin' indie rock bands, pop, whatever the hell it is. I don't even know anymore. It was just white noise. And then a band came on in the middle of it that sounded nothing like the rest of these bands. They were called the Orwells. I'll never forget them. Because it was just a day of just crap. But these guys came on, and it was like they were just young kids. But once they started playing, that was rock and roll. I was like, those are rock stars. And I think half of them had been drinking their socks off all day. They were drunk as hell. They were on stage. They reminded me of like a bunch of primordial monkeys trying to figure it out in the trees while they were playing. They were just making faces and yelling at each other, but it was rock and roll. And the lead singer, somebody, said something to him on stage. He hadn't even opened his beer yet, and he threw it and hit somebody right in the fucking face. And I went,
and you're like, yeah! One last question about rock stars.
Rock stars. Yeah, when are we going to get to the sex part and the drugs?
I think it's going to be a 3-parter.
The best bands are people that have nothing in common. It's like, I've seen these bands, okay, everybody in the band likes Alice in Chains. What's the band going to sound like?
Nirvana.
Sure, I was going to be a rock star. You know what I was supposed to be doing at this age? My house was supposed to be illuminated by Grammys. Yeah. And just awards, and it was supposed to be in Malibu, and Julianne Moore was supposed to be right in my face like it was the Triple Crown. That was supposed to be what was happening.
Yeah, now you're doing a video with me, so.
And now I'm doing a video with you.